The pandemic instigated great resignation of 2021 is affecting every sector of the economy. A new PricewaterhouseCoopers survey of workers and business executives projects that as many as two-thirds of employees in the United States were looking for a new job in August, double the number in May. The AEC industry isn't immune, but can it ride this wave? Joining us today is Karl Feldman, a partner with Hinge Marketing, which has done extensive research on what makes workers seek greener pastures and what companies can do better to keep their employees happy and in the fold. Welcome, Karl.
Hi, John.
Karl, can you give our audience a sense of how this great resignation phenomenon is affecting the AEC world?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a topic that I have spoken about and conferences and with clients for many years in the context of the war for talent. We in AEC, this is great. We want to work. Now, how do we get it done? And especially those rising stars and leaders that we're cultivating within our organizations, those have been the hardest folks to attract and retain, as we grow. So right now, the Great Resignation is just heating up that war for talent. It is now even harder, and folks that may have been hanging in there are now looking at greener pastures. And sometimes it's not obvious to AEC firm leadership what exactly to do about that or why. It just comes in a wave, which can be extremely disruptive. It's not lost on me that this has become front page news as well. AEC specifically, I looked at the New York Times this morning, and it was talking about skilled workers.
Exactly.
I mean, this is a big deal, and we've got as a country, we've got a lot of national infrastructure initiatives underway. You've got demand running smack into some of these challenges and work-life balance and culture and all of these things that the best talent are looking for. So.
Mm-hmm. Is there something going on right now, though, that is causing architects, engineers, and contractors to be getting a little antsy in their jobs than they might have been previously?
Yeah, I mean, the elephant in the corner of the room, of course, is the global pandemic. But I think in so many, Hinge, we do research on all professional services, and then we, segment and slice down by each vertical. We see that impact across the board. I mean, it's heavily disruptive. However, one thread that we see, and this is very true of AEC, is that the pandemic, it hasn't created so many completely new challenges. It's accelerated and exacerbated challenges that were already there.
Mm-hmm.
So take pandemic as one. We know that's pretty obvious. But what's underneath that? Mergers and acquisitions. For one, this is something that we have had challenges with, and it has accelerated before the pandemic. We had a lot of baby boomers that were looking to retire, smaller firms looking succession planning. Lots of that activity was happening. These large firms, bringing on new talent, new services, new folks into the fold. And out of all the verticals that we study, AEC has gotten kind of the next to HR and staffing, sorry guys, the lowest results for satisfaction from team on how they handle mergers and acquisitions.
Mm-hmm.
That has only ratcheted up through the pandemic, because you can imagine with communication challenges, work-life balance, all of the strain, it just makes it even harder at a time when you really need cohesion. I think there's also the strains of the communication and work itself. We have, a lot of, essential team that needs to stay in the field. We have, very specific challenges around the hybrid work environment, whether that's how much is remote, how much is in the office, how much is leadership having to deal with in terms of communication and unpredictable issues that pop up. We have a flare up in an office or somewhere. How much does that take, and how paralyzing is that, and what other things don't happen because of that? So you get that rippling out. And then I think lastly, a lot of folks in unpredictable times, especially our rising stars that maybe we fought really hard to bring on, need to retain, or that we're looking to, help to fuel our growth and satisfy demand. Over the last year and a half, according to our research, a lot of these folks have been hanging in there. They may have things that have been bothering them. They may not have been vocal about it because they're on the fence. They're uncertain. There's a lot of things going on that are unpredictable. They don't know if the bottom will fall out tomorrow or what's going on. So they just stay. And so some of that dissatisfaction can build up. And then it's like a tectonic plate shift. Now we're feeling that.
Is there something that companies should be doing better to understand the career priorities of their employees, and particularly at different stages of career development?
Yes, and I will stay objective. Take Hinge out of the equation, whether you use an agency or not. Research and having the forums to discuss these issues is number one. So the safer that you can make teams feel through confidentiality, getting objective responses to what things are most important to you. How well have we done communicating challenges or what's going on in our approach to the pandemic or our approach to a new acquisition, new teams onboarding. It really comes down to, I think, the common threads for AEC, and this is, borne out in some of the stats and responses, is that it's communication, transparency, and that the vision around culture and what that means practically. How are we taking care of our people? How are we engaged in building their skill sets, their visibility? That, by the way, is consistent with the firm's, most firms like growth goals, whether that's upgrading quality of work or upgrading quantity of work or diversifying work. Those things are pretty consistent with what the firm wants as well, but often I think in AEC we forget or are not really sure of how to do a good job internally with that. And it's challenging.
That's a good point, because my experience in work has always been that the company asks questions that are beneficial to the company,
Right.
as opposed to the individual employee. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering if, in your experience, have you found that companies, when they're trying to communicate with employees to find out what's going on, are they asking the right questions?
No, no, John, that's a great point. I mean, it's a little bit of a, oh my gosh moment. But often it's like two ships passing in the night. And often leadership teams, they really do care. Yes. I mean, let's speak. And by the way, full transparency, I have half of my family are engineers. They're thinking by the numbers, right? Are we performing well here? What's our KSAs on point, all of these things. What they are asking in an engineering way is, are you okay? Are you getting the tools you need? Are we helping you succeed? But we may need to ask it that way, and asking it in a way that's open and not leading too much. That's often, I mean, that's easier said than done, right? Yeah. That's why sometimes it pays to get a little bit of expert consultation on that research, so you ask the right questions and you keep it open and don't lead. Sometimes the question you ask is defining the response, so you're going to get what you hoped for in that way, and the issues will persist. But absolutely, I think some of that perception it's unfair, but it's also a reality. A lot of teams, they think, oh, well, my leadership, they only care about our profitability. What's the bottom line? And leadership teams, I mean, and I spend a lot of time personally with them and boards, they do care. They understand our success is the success of our team. I think it's just articulating that, or making sure you have the right forums and tools to understand that in a good frequency. I don't have a better way to explain that. It can't be like an annual thing. The world is changing around us very quickly, so having regular check-ins for these kinds of things and being able to respond to them is important.
Yeah. I would suspect that this check-in that you were alluding to is part of a larger laundry list of things
Oh,
that companies could be doing internally to find and retain talent. Can you go over a couple of those with me?
sure, sure. And I think the real silver lining here, because let's be real, especially with pandemic and all the challenges we're facing, there's a lot to do in a finite amount of time to do it in. And when you think about terms, I mean, I'm sure anybody listening to this podcast, someone out there, you're rolling your eyes like, oh, culture. What culture? What the heck does that mean? It's like, you fluffy marketing people and your culture. It does have a meaning, and it does come down to some very specific actions. The good news is a lot of the same things that we would advise doing for your brand to grow your firm, all the things that matter, like bottom line and thriving and all of that, with a little bit of a tweak and how we communicate that, it's the same things that your teams are looking for. So I'll take for an example, okay, one of the personas that we hear the most about, the hardest to attract and retain, are those up and coming leaders. Not the super leadership board level, but those folks that are going to propel your firm and help build the practices or service lines, skilled, mid-career, moving aggressively forward. What are they interested in? They are interested in building their visibility. They're interested in joining a team that's demonstrating that they're growing, that's showing the signs of, and this is specific from the research, on a website, that they can see evidence that that firm is investing in their talents visibility, that they're investing in their growth, and that they're clearly articulating what's different about them. Now, if that sounds similar to the things that you should do to grow your firm, grow your practices, and grow your service lines, it's because it is. But it's looking at it from that internal lens, like, I'm growing. I want the firm I'm joining to be growing. I want them to be doing the right things. And by the way, if the world's tough and we're hanging in there, that there's clarity and vision of how we're doing that together. Those are things that more and more, and this is another trend that's accelerated through the pandemic, recruits and current employees are looking to things like the website, looking to things like LinkedIn for validation of that. Leadership saying the words isn't enough. Seeing that in practice, especially on digital platforms, online platforms, is huge. That's often where they're going for validation, confirmation, recognition from their peers. That's where these things are happening. And I think pre-pandemic, we as a vertical had a lot of skepticism about that. And I think there's a lot more understanding around there now. Like, we see it, we don't necessarily know what to do with it yet, but that's happening.
Is there a conundrum involved here in that companies that try to build up their employees to star level run the risk, they always run the risk of losing that person anyhow, but it may be exacerbated by current events. Is the star system that sort of exists in this industry anyhow, is this wise at this moment?
John, I'll tell you, I could joke and say I've never heard that question before, but that is one of the most common objections to doing what we should be doing. And I think the best way that I can describe how we should not be concerned about that is, these platforms and tools exist no matter what. If we did not invest in our rising stars' visibility and growth and their success, they see everyone else's on these platforms. And that is like gravity sucking them away from your organization if you do nothing. If you do invest, they're part of that visibility. They are engaged in that. And hopefully we're, as leadership, doing the right things to engage them in that process and help them understand the camaraderie with the rest of their team, how they're They're part of our shared success. And so by doing nothing, you're actually just fueling that, because these platforms and things exist elsewhere. It's a common objection, but if you think about it in that context, it's pretty clear. You know what you should be doing. You need to invest. You need to engage. You need to build up the visibility, and it's good for your firm, and it's good for retaining that talent.
Mm-hmm. My last question is about whether or not this great resignation phenomenon is kind of a short-term issue here for companies, or whether it's going to perpetuate. And if that's the case, if employees are inclined towards job mobility, then what does that mean for a company's stability? What does it mean for their corporate culture? And what should they be preparing for? If you're looking 5 years ahead.
Yeah, it's kind of tied to your last question. It's not so much like promoting folks' visibility that's going to cause the problem. If somebody leaves, you've got other problems to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Here, right from the audiences, and this is fresh. We're putting together the full report for this, but numbers 1, 2, and 3. What are this top talent looking for? AEC talent, and especially we over-indexed in that rising star category. A well-defined and articulated culture for the firm, that the firm can speak about themselves in a differentiated way, and that the website reflects these things, that they can see not the words, but evidence of it. I don't have a crystal ball to know how long the ripples of disruption will go, but I would advise that it is safe to assume that they will continue. And I don't think at the level of churn that we're seeing now, that will almost certainly wind down at some point, but it's always going to be there. I think what will stay, earlier I was talking about how trends accelerated rather than changing wholesale. It's not completely new trends, they've accelerated significantly. We can expect some of that to slow down, but some things will stay. So where the trajectory of those trends were headed, the fact that our teams communicate more on these digital platforms, that relationships and referrals and validation are happening on platforms like LinkedIn, that conversation is actually happening, that's probably going to stay. Will it always be LinkedIn? Who knows? But that type of behavior will stay. Having some of that hybrid, the in-person and remote work, very likely to stay. In a past life, I worked with Herman Miller, and they've done a lot of research. It's very relevant for them. What does the office space look like? And it's largely, there's going to be some kind of balance. We don't know exactly what, but it will be some balance, like getting comfortable with video conference, a little bit of meta impact here, but this whole environment, this is here to stay. And some firms have been very comfortable with that and have gotten more comfortable. Others, the pandemic has forced them into this world. So, it depends where you are on the spectrum of the trend, but think of some of those things that have already been moving in one direction, that some of those things will probably stay in place. Conferences, there will likely be online and live components to all of the major conferences we attend now. And as if you are a thought leader, an expert in your industry, or you're trying to cultivate those rising stars, it's going to be important that they have the skill set to thrive in that environment too. Live presentations, remote presentations, podcasts, article writing, those types of things are much more important now and much more visible, tangible now than they have ever been for the audience. But I'll go back to that point of, AEC specifically, what can we do? It's internal communication and that clearly articulated culture. And if you are however you're impacted by a merger and acquisition, whether it's you're the acquirer, you've been acquired, making sure that as a whole team, that clarity of understanding, like, how do the brands come together? What is the vision for the endpoint? How are we welcoming the talent that we've worked so hard to bring in? How are we welcoming them into the fold? What things need to adjust, and being clear and confident about that. Those are tangible things that we can do to make a big difference. Across the professional services, we're behind the curve on those marks, and ahead of the curve in mergers and acquisitions. There's not another professional services that is seeing a level of acquisitions and, also like, leadership retirement that we have. And so this is an even more important issue for us to work on.
Carl, thanks for the time that you gave us and for your insights on this topic, which is definitely something that everybody is thinking about.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Great conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I enjoyed it too. And this is John Caulfield. Thanks to our audience for joining us.